All right, everybody, we are live. We are super excited about this webinar. We've put a lot of work into preparing this material.
Yeah, super glad you guys are here. It looks like we got a ton of people from all around the planet here. So first question for you guys, in the chat box, if you can see the chat box, just go ahead and type your hometown. Where are you guys from? We'd love to hear what kind of representation we got here today.
Yeah, let us know. We are in Santa Monica, California right now. So, we just got back from finishing our retreat, which is in Southern California, and we're hanging out here before we go on a trip. We're traveling for a bit here. We're going to Maryland. We're going to Washington, D.C. for the PCRM conference, but it's good to be here right now.
California, New Hampshire, Michigan, California, Lexington, Kentucky. Whoa, Philadelphia, Dallas. But you guys need to slow down.
This is great.
A lot of people here.
Love it. This is terrific.
Cool.
So much fun to be interacting with you guys live here. Houston, Texas, somewhere from Poland. I bet it's probably pretty early in the morning in Poland.
Yeah, that's a true commitment.
Yeah, we like that dedication. Somebody in Peru. Wonderful. Got somebody from Mexico, Los Angeles. All right, go Los Angeles. I hope you have been going to the farmers markets. Texas, San Diego, Oregon. India, we got somebody from Bangalore, India. Wonderful. Vancouver.
Montreal, look at that. San Diego, Dallas, Fort Worth, Oregon, San Diego. Oh, I don't think I can read this fast. This is great.
So what type of diabetes?
Yeah, okay. So on you guys' screen now, we're going to load a survey. It's a poll. So click, we want to know a simple question. What type of diabetes are you guys living with? Is it type 1 diabetes? Is it type 1.5? Is it pre-diabetes? Is it type 2 diabetes? Is it gestational diabetes? Maybe you don't have diabetes, or perhaps you have a loved one with diabetes. So we want to kind of get a gauge for exactly who's in the room here, because that way we can understand when we're talking exactly how to craft our presentation.
This is really fun to see the numbers changing in real time. These bars are sliding. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but it looks like the largest percentage of people in the room right now is people living with type 2 diabetes.
So we have about 20% of people with type 1, about 40% of people with type 2, and then about 15% of people with pre-diabetes. And then this is really interesting. There's 20% of people who don't have any diabetes at all.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, this is great. And then maybe about 10% of people have a loved one who is living with diabetes.
Well, if I didn't have diabetes, I'd probably be on this webinar too, because this is a very interesting topic. So much confusion around this particular topic about ketogenic diets. So we're really, really excited to cover this material today.
Absolutely. So yeah, why don't you hit end poll?
All right, so let's go here.
Is that top?
End poll.
There you go. Cool.
All right.
All right. Beautiful. So let's get started.
Let's get started.
Like
so we're going to share our screen so you can see the program. There it is.
Okay, here we go.
Here. How do you switch slides?
Okay, I'll show you. Okay. 1 second. Let's get this thing going. There we go. All right. So the title of our presentation here today is we're talking about ketogenic diets. And given that there's over 1,100 people who registered for this webinar, it seems like ketogenic diets are a very important topic. As you guys have probably experienced, if you're looking for any information about diabetes, you see information about ketogenic diets pop up right away. And it's really important to understand whether or not ketogenic diets are actually safe in the short term and the long term. So what we're going to do today is kind of go over a lot of the research about ketogenic diets so that you can decide for yourself whether or not it's an important or it's an intelligent decision.
Okay, so today on the webinar, our goal is we are focusing on scientific evidence. We're going to review the literature. Cyrus is going to talk about the stuff he did while doing his PhD in nutritional biochemistry. This is not a place where we will tolerate people being disrespectful. It's not our goal to be disrespectful towards the ketogenic community or anybody following that program. That's not what we're here for. This is just an open, honest dialogue and conversation about the science of insulin resistance. That's what we're here to do today. So if there's anybody in the chat box who is not being respectful, if there's name calling, if there's swear words, if there's people being rude, we are going to kick you out of the webinar. That's not tolerated. If people want to have a discussion, share resources, that's fine, no problem. But this is a respectful environment.
Okay, so I'll give you a quick rundown of my story. Some of you guys may have heard it before, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Cyrus Kambata. I was diagnosed with 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 autoimmune conditions in my senior year of college. I was 22. I was attending Stanford University. I was studying mechanical engineering. And out of nowhere, I started to feel very, very low energy. I was urinating 15 to 20 times a day, and I was drinking between 1 and 2 gallons of water a day. In the span of 6 months, I developed Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or hypothyroidism, alopecia universalis, which is exactly why I have no hair, I have no eyebrows, I have no eyelashes, no nose hair, no armpit hair. And then as the icing on the cake, I developed type 1 diabetes. All 3 of these set in within a 6-month period. So I was a little nervous. I didn't exactly understand what diabetes meant, and I didn't know why I had multiple autoimmune conditions. So I listened to everything that the doctors and nurses told me. And they instructed me to eat a low carbohydrate diet because it's the one-size-fits-all prescription for all people living with diabetes, regardless of whether it's type 1, prediabetes, or type 2. So I started to eat more of the foods like you see pictured here, more cheeses, butters, eggs, bacon, meat, and then I had small amounts of carbohydrates like bread and a couple of fruits here and there. So what I noticed while doing this approach was that no matter how hard I tried, my blood glucose seemed like it was out of control. So you see this blood glucose meter here with a reading of 284. That was a pretty average reading for me. Sometimes I'd be 45, sometimes I'd be 345. I felt like my blood glucose meter had become a random number generator, and it was very frustrating. On top of that, my energy levels dwindled. I was not able to play sports. And as a result of that, I knew inherently that I needed to make a change for the better. So after about a year of living with type 1 diabetes on a low carbohydrate diet, I transitioned to a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. And in so doing, I started to eat foods like you see the ones pictured here. Lots of fruits, lots of vegetables, and lots of color. So this is what happened to my carbohydrate intake. I started with a carbohydrate intake at approximately 100 grams per day, which in full disclosure is not a ketogenic diet. I do not claim to have ever eaten a ketogenic diet. We'll be focusing on the research, not my personal experience with it. But I started out about 100 grams of carbohydrate per day. And within the first week, I had quadrupled that to 400 grams of carbohydrate. And then within the first 3 weeks, I had gone up all the way to 600 grams of carbohydrate per day. So if you look at this graph, you might think to yourself, okay, well, man with type 1 diabetes, 6 tuples carbohydrate intake, therefore you might predict that his insulin use would go up, at least a little bit. Or some people think maybe it would go up by 50%. Some people think maybe it would double. This is what happened to my insulin use. My insulin use fell by 40% in 3 weeks. And I knew immediately when this happened to me that something very interesting was happening under the surface. Because if my carbohydrate intake had six-tupled or six-fold changed and my insulin use went in the opposite direction, that would mean that this carbohydrate-centric view of diabetes may actually not be correct. So this is exactly what had happened. You see in the blue, my carbohydrate intake went up. In the orange, my insulin use fell. And so this traditional model of eat carbohydrate, take more insulin was being challenged, and it was incredibly interesting. So long story short, I returned to school to go get a PhD in nutritional biochemistry because I wanted to understand what was happening inside of me. And so I attended UC Berkeley. I went there for 5 years. And in that process, I was able to perform a PhD on the causes and the effects of insulin resistance. And while I was there at UC Berkeley, I was studying under the supervision of one of the world's experts in carbohydrate metabolism. And he forced me to read over 3,000 scientific papers on diabetes, insulin resistance, and intermittent fasting. And in this process, I started to really learn the causal mechanisms of insulin resistance. So here I am today, 15 years later. I've reduced my insulin use by 40%. Now, on a daily basis, I eat more than 700 grams of carbohydrate per day, not per week, but per day. And my A1C values are consistently between a 5.6% and a 6.0 all day long, every single day.
So my name is Robbie Barbero, also known as Mindful Diabetic Robbie on social media, where I love to share pictures of what I'm eating and what I'm doing. Absolutely love it. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 12, just about to turn 13. And at this time, I was following the standard American diet. I was quite athletic, playing tennis. And at this time, I took allergy medication, I had terrible acne, and I suffered from plantar fasciitis. So in the beginning, I was eating a low carbohydrate diet, was doing a Weston A. Price Foundation type of approach where I was not allowed to eat fruit. It was too high in sugar. I had to limit that. I was eating lots of grass-fed beef, raw milk, and stuff like that. And it was definitely a low carbohydrate diet. So then after that, I evolved and started to eat a plant-based version of a low carbohydrate diet. So this was a program I did with Gabriel Cousins. He has a phase 1 diet, did this for a month, and my carbohydrate intake definitely was under 30 grams. I was taking the least amount of insulin I have ever taken. It was about 11 total units. And again, we'll talk about that more later on about insulin sensitivity, where today I'm more like 40 total units. But while I was doing this approach of taking a super low amount of insulin, super low amount of carbohydrates, I had very low energy. I was on campus at the University of Florida and almost blacked out several times. It was quite scary. So at this point, I've tried a lot of things. I've done a lot of research. I'm just trying to do the best thing I can for my health, and I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't working. So I went back to a naturopath that I saw in the past, and she explained that I should do some expensive chelation therapy. Maybe it was heavy metals and all these toxins in me, and I was really considering that. But before I ended up doing that, which was going to cost a lot of money and I was ready to do it, I actually found this approach of eating low-fat, plant-based. And I signed up for a coaching program. It was 3 months where I was communicating with the coach every single day, and it was the best decision I've ever made. It dramatically changed my life. So now I'm learning that I can eat fruits. I started eating a lot more greens. Well, there wasn't more greens. I ate a lot of greens in the past too, but it was mainly more fruit. And that's what I started doing, eating a wide variety of fruits. Here you see a persimmon pictured. I'm starting to pick persimmons, getting to eat mangoes. It was absolutely amazing. So during that time, I've been doing that approach for the past 10 years. I started this in December of 2006. And over the past 10 years, I've never had an A1C above 6.4. My current A1C, it's actually 5.9. I need to update the slide. But I'm enjoying the food I'm eating. My diet, my overall health is amazing. I have energy. I feel great. And I just love to share this with others.
All right, so today's webinar is about insulin resistance, as you guys have probably determined from the title. More importantly, what we're going to talk about is how to turn the insulin resistant state into the insulin sensitive state. Because ultimately, insulin sensitivity is what we are all striving for, and insulin resistance is what we're trying to avoid. So let's first start out by understanding what exactly is insulin sensitivity. Now, the reason I want to be very, very, very clear about this is because in the world of low carbohydrate metabolism and in the world of low carbohydrate diets and in the world of low fat diets, it seems like people talk about things in different ways. It's almost like there's multiple conversations happening at the same time. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page so that those of us following a ketogenic diet and those of us following a more plant-based diet are at least in agreement about what insulin sensitivity actually is. So you can see here that insulin sensitivity is defined as your 24-hour carbohydrate intake divided by your 24-hour insulin use in order to maintain euglycemia. Well, what the heck does that mean? Okay, euglycemia is just a fancy scientific way of saying keeping your blood glucose within the normal range. So the first question that comes to mind is, well, what is the normal range? Because again, in the low carbohydrate world, they will tell you that the normal range is to keep your blood glucose between 80 and 90 all day long, every day. But in the low fat world, the people experience slightly larger blood glucose elevations, And the question is, well, what is considered appropriate? So there's some papers here that we dug up that actually monitored blood glucose changes in individuals that are non-diabetic. These are healthy individuals who have no appearance of diabetes or glucose metabolism changes. And as a result of that, we are asking a simple question. What is the standard range that blood glucose can fluctuate in a healthy individual? What you see here is that in non-diabetic individuals, blood glucose fluctuates between about 80 and about 110 on a daily basis. So in one paper, we see a fluctuation between about 80 and 110. And in another paper, we see the same thing, about 80 and 110. Now, some papers have gone so far as to show that glucose fluctuations in non-diabetic healthy individuals range from between 70 to 144 on a daily basis. And this is actually very important because regardless of which one is correct, whether it's between 70 and 144 or whether it's between 80 and 110, the fact of the matter is that blood glucose in normal individuals does fluctuate at a very minimum 30 milligrams per deciliter and as high as 70 to 80. So euglycemia does not necessarily mean keeping your blood glucose between 80 and 90 all day long every day. This type of over-restrictive control of blood glucose is actually not representative of normal human physiology. What is more representative of human physiology is to have blood glucose variations on a daily basis between 70 and 145, or if you're not comfortable with 145, call it 70 to 120. So the next question we ask ourselves is, how do you actually measure insulin sensitivity? Because again, between the low carbohydrate world and the low fat world, sometimes we have multiple conversations. So this is a really important topic, and I want you guys to really, if you can write this stuff down, this is going to help you out in the long term, because insulin sensitivity can become a relatively confusing topic unless you have your ducks in a row. So first and foremost, the primary function of insulin is to promote glucose uptake out of your blood and into tissues, okay? You'll hear a lot of the times that that insulin is your fat storage hormone. People will say this over and over and over again. Insulin is your fat storage hormone. And if you look at the biology of insulin, what you'll find out is that insulin is actually your glucose storage hormone. It happens to work. It happens to promote fat uptake, but it's primarily directed at orchestrating the glucose symphony. So here's what I mean. Take a look at this picture shown here on your screen. You see a blood vessel on the right and you see a muscle tissue on your left. So in your blood, insulin and glucose are circulating 24 hours a day. Small amounts of insulin are ideal, and a reasonable amount of glucose, again, between 70 and 120 milligrams per deciliter of glucose is considered normal. Now, glucose's role, the reason glucose circulates in your blood in the first place is because glucose, its job is to get inside of tissues. Glucose is an energy source. Glucose doesn't really have much function inside of your blood other than feeding red blood cells. Its goal is to actually make it inside of your liver, inside of your brain, and inside of your muscle so that those tissues can use it for energy. However, glucose can't just enter those tissues for free. Glucose requires an escort, and the escort is insulin. So insulin circulates in your blood, and insulin is, you can think of it as an escort or a key that unlocks the door that allows glucose to enter tissues. So it's important to understand that insulin is the most powerful anabolic hormone in your body. And this is very, very important. The term anabolic means growth, okay? Insulin is the most powerful anabolic hormone in your body. And what that means is that insulin promotes the uptake of glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids together. So again, insulin can help glucose get into tissues, can help amino acids from protein get into tissues, and it can help fatty acids get into tissues. But the primary function of insulin is to promote glucose uptake. It's not to promote amino acid uptake, and it is not designed to promote fatty acid uptake. Its role is actually to promote glucose uptake, and that's a very important distinction. So now the question comes, well, great. How do we measure insulin resistance, and how do you measure insulin sensitivity? Well, fasting insulin, if you go to your doctor and you say, hey, doctor, I want you to give me a test for insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, a lot of doctors will simply measure your fasting insulin level. They'll take a look at your fasting insulin level, and if your fasting insulin level is low, they'll say, hey, congratulations, see you later. You're not insulin resistant. The problem here is that in order to measure insulin sensitivity, we have to measure both insulin and glucose together. If you are only measuring one of them, you are missing the bigger picture. And most importantly, you have to challenge your tissues with glucose. If there is no glucose challenge involved in the test, then you are not actually measuring insulin sensitivity. So your fasting insulin is merely just a moment in time calculation or measurement of how much insulin is present in your blood. And it doesn't take any glucose into account and therefore is not a reasonable measure of insulin sensitivity. Again, your 24-hour insulin use itself is also not an accurate measurement of insulin sensitivity, again, because it's not taking into account anything related to carbohydrate or anything related to glucose. Like I said before, an accurate measurement of insulin sensitivity is going to take both glucose and insulin into account. Okay? You guys might have heard of the oral glucose tolerance test. In the chat window, tell me if you have heard of the oral glucose tolerance test. Write yes if you have, write no if you haven't. Okay? This is actually one of the single most important tests that you will ever take in your life. And it is very important for both people with diabetes and for people not with diabetes. So we see lots of no's, yeses, no's, yeses, no's, yeses. There's kind of, looks about 50-50, maybe a little bit more yeses than no's. Okay, so let me run you through an oral glucose tolerance test because this is one of the most important tests that you will ever take for insulin sensitivity. So here's how it works. On the left column, you have your time point. Okay, so this test takes place over the course of about 2 hours. So what happens is you show up to a doctor's office, and the first thing your doctor will do is will measure your glucose and your insulin the minute you get there, with nothing inside of you in the fasting state. Then your doctor will challenge you with a 75-gram glucose solution. So what that means is they'll hand you a glass that has 75 grams of glucose dissolved in water that tastes very sweet. You drink that, and then you start your stopwatch. 60 minutes later, your doctor will sample your blood and test for both your glucose level as well as your insulin concentration. And then at 120 minutes, they will do the same thing. So this way, you have basically 3 glucose measurements and 3 insulin measurements. Now, ideally, your glucose will start under 100 and it will go as high as 120, but no higher. And your insulin will start less than 5 and it should go no higher than 30. If that's the case, then you are considered insulin sensitive. If either your glucose goes above that range or your insulin goes above that range, then you are considered insulin resistant. So this is exactly what the results of an oral glucose tolerance test may look like. Okay, in the red, you have an individual who is considered healthy and not insulin resistant, or you could say in this situation, not diabetic. So you'll see their fasting insulin is underneath 100, which is good. And then as soon as they're given that 75-gram glucose challenge, their blood glucose goes up, it hits about 120, and then it comes right back down within a 2-hour period. That is exactly what we're talking about when we're looking at an insulin-sensitive response. For individuals who are insulin resistant, you'll see the shape of the green curve on the top. Notice the fasting insulin level is elevated. It's higher than 100. And the minute that a 75-gram oral glucose challenge is given, blood glucose goes way up. And it hits a peak of about 200, and then it takes a long time to get back down to approximately where it started. So in the green curve, you're looking at an individual who is insulin resistant, and in a red curve, you're looking at an individual who's actually insulin sensitive. Now, here's what happens. If you are eating a low-fat diet, what you will find if you take if you take an oral glucose tolerance test, is that you are likely to show that you are insulin sensitive, and your blood glucose excursion on an oral glucose tolerance test will not be very high. So you see the shape of the curve in blue. That's what happens to individuals who eat a low-fat diet. If you consume a single meal that contains a high-fat food, and a high-fat food, or let's just say if the fat content of your meal is anything over 10 grams per meal, what ends up happening is that your glucose excursion can go up. And this happens all the time in individuals who eat a high-fat meal or a high-fat diet in general. They'll see these large glucose excursions, and then they might get frustrated saying, well, it's the carbohydrate that's causing the problem, when in reality, it's the presence of fat that's actually causing the glucose excursion. So you see here on the left a whole bunch of different tests that you can take as an individual to try and figure out whether or not you are insulin sensitive or whether or not you are insulin resistant. And if you look in these first two columns, you'll see, is there a glucose challenge and is there an insulin measurement? And in the top 4 tests, the fasting insulin test, the 24-hour insulin use, your 24-hour blood glucose profile, and the HOMA, you see that there either a glucose challenge is missing or an insulin measurement is missing. And therefore, all 4 of those tests are not actually valid measurements of insulin sensitivity, okay? The only 3 valid measurements of insulin sensitivity are the 3 on the bottom. The first one's called the euglycemic clamp, which, trust me, is the most horrendously complicated test ever devised. You can perform it in a research setting. It costs thousands of dollars. I used to do this all the time in graduate school. It is very complicated, and no reasonable individual is going to spend their time or money getting this done. So what you can do as an individual is you can measure your 24-hour carbohydrate to insulin ratio if you are living with insulin-dependent diabetes, or you can perform an oral glucose tolerance test. Both of those are extremely valid measurements of insulin sensitivity. Now, one thing I want to address here is you'll see the 24-hour blood glucose profile and the 24-hour insulin use as both invalid measurements of insulin sensitivity. Now, a lot of people in the low carbohydrate world often experience some really remarkable positive changes in their blood glucose profile and in their insulin use. And they'll find that as soon as they go into a low carbohydrate diet, that their blood glucose flatlines. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. If you go to any ketogenic website, you go to any article about a ketogenic diet, and you will see individuals with a flat blood glucose. That is a good thing. However, since they're not taking into account their insulin, that is not a measurement of insulin sensitivity. At the same time, you will see individuals with very low insulin use. And that is also considered a good thing. However, if you're not taking glucose into account, neither one of those are actually comprehensive measurements of insulin sensitivity. So again, the only 2 measurements that are actually valid are the 24-hour carbohydrate to insulin ratio for those with insulin dependent, or the oral glucose tolerance test.
And so, a big mistake people make is that they confuse a decrease in total amount of insulin injected and confuse that with insulin sensitivity. So just because somebody has changed their diet and now their total insulin use is low does not necessarily mean they are now actually seeing an improvement in insulin sensitivity. So I personally experienced that when I did a less than 30 grams of carbohydrate per day program. I had the least amount of total insulin, but my carbohydrate intake was also so low that the insulin sensitivity was the worst I've ever been. No question about it. So here on the screen, we have a quote from an article by Dr. Mark Hyman, which, again, we're not necessarily endorsing his material here, just pointing out that somebody who is an advocate of the low carbohydrate approach is also a big supporter of this oral glucose tolerance test. And that's something that Cyrus was just talking about. It's very important. And you can imagine if somebody's eating a diet of less than 30 grams of carbohydrates per day, you can imagine how would they perform on a test where they have to consume 75 grams in one sitting. And this is, again, a test that Dr. Mark Hyman supports. So I think it's really important to note that.
Okay, so let's get a little bit into the biology of insulin resistance here, because this is really the meat and potatoes, pun intended, of this presentation. The biology of insulin resistance is something that's highly misunderstood. So let's walk through it step by step to make sure that we're all on the same page about what actually causes insulin resistance. All right, so insulin resistance, the reason why we're even talking about it in the first place is because I like to think of it as a central node. In that sense, it is the precursor condition that increases your risk for all chronic disease. And those chronic diseases you'll see here in the blue circles all around. It can be any version of diabetes. It could be increased risk for cancer, coronary artery disease, hypertension, atherosclerosis, obesity, high cholesterol, fatty liver, which is insulin resistance of the liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome for ladies who are living with that. It increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease, for neuropathy, for blindness, for kidney failure, for retinopathy, and for erectile dysfunction. This is just a small list of all the chronic diseases that insulin resistance influences in a negative manner. Now, most importantly, insulin resistance increases your risk for heart disease. If you go into the literature like I do on a daily basis and read about the effect of insulin resistance on promoting any version of cardiovascular disease, what you will find is that paper after paper after paper shows that when insulin resistance is present, your risk for heart disease doesn't go up by 10 or 20%. It increases by 3 to 4-fold, which is 300 to 400%. So it's very important to understand that your heart health is directly related to your level of insulin resistance. So in the world of diabetes, we have 3 different classes of diabetes. We have the autoimmune conditions, which are type 1 and 1.5. Then you have the lifestyle versions of types of diabetes, prediabetes and type 2. And then you have the female/menstruation version of diabetes, which is gestational diabetes or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it turns out that insulin resistance is present in all of these conditions. Insulin resistance is actually the connecting condition which unifies all 3 of these conditions, and it explains the biology beautifully that's present in all of these different flavors of diabetes. Okay, so before we get into the actual molecular mechanisms, let's do a little exercise here. In the chat box, I want you guys to type in what you believe to be the cause of insulin resistance, okay? So in other words, if somebody walks up to you and said, hey, insulin resistance is caused by blank, what would you say? I'm curious to see what kind of responses you guys have. Okay, we got diet, high-fat diet. Sugar, intramyocellular lipids, refined carbohydrate, inflammation, fat, intramyocellular fat, diet, too much fat, inflammation, too much sugar, fat in cells where it should not be, the inability of glucose to enter cells, fat storage in wrong places, sugar, exclamation point, inflammation, standard American diet, saturated fat in muscles, dietary fat, sugar, lack of exercise, producing too much insulin over a long time, the buildup of fat in organs that are not designed to store fat, genetics, too much cheese. That's brilliant. Mangoes. Oh, Jamie, I don't know about this. This is classic. I love this. Too much body fat, fat stored in liver and muscles, Cuban, Italian, American diet, lack of carbohydrate. Okay, so you guys are nailing this. A lot of you, I think, understand the physiology, but let's go into detail about this because this is actually the fun part as far as I'm concerned. All right, so whenever somebody talks about liver insulin resistance, I want you guys to think of 2 tissues: your liver and your muscle. That's it. Insulin resistance is a dysfunction of both your muscle and your liver together. And like a lot of you guys wrote down, insulin resistance is caused by the storage of fat in tissues that are not designed to store fat. Please write this down. Please grab a pen or a piece of paper or grab your smartphone and take a screen capture of what you see. This is one of the most important things you will ever learn in your diabetes life. And I will leave this on screen for about 10 more seconds. So please write this down. If anybody ever asks you what causes insulin resistance, just say insulin resistance is the storage of fat in tissues that are not designed to store fat. Period. End of story. Okay, 3, 2, 1, switch takes. Okay. So this is what happens in normal glucose metabolism. Both insulin and glucose circulate in the blood, a reasonable amount of both, a small amount of insulin and a reasonable amount of glucose. Now, glucose, like we said earlier, cannot enter tissues for free. Therefore, insulin escorts it to the tissue and allows glucose to enter. The same exact thing happens inside of your muscle. When that glucose gets inside of your liver, that glucose can either be burned for energy or it can be stored as glycogen. So you'll see here I depicted the blue circles as stored glucose as glycogen. Now you will also see these yellow circles in the top left of your liver and the yellow circles in the muscle. And that's a depiction of small amounts of fat. Now these tissues can hold on to small amounts of fat. And that's a very important thing because small amounts of fat are perfectly normal. It's normal human physiology. But large amounts of fat, as you'll see, is where this whole picture goes crazy. So again, insulin helps glucose get into your liver. Insulin also helps glucose get into your muscle. And when both of those tissues are insulin sensitive, then you're able to use glucose as energy and you're able to store it as glycogen. So this right here is exactly what we're looking for. Now, if you follow a ketogenic diet, you'll see in the middle that fatty acids become your primary fuel source. So now that fatty acids are your primary fuel source, the glucose concentration goes significantly down because you're not consuming large quantities of carbohydrate. You're not eating carbohydrate-rich foods, and therefore the amount of glucose in your blood has gone down tremendously. Now, fatty acids can get stored into multiple tissues. They can get stored in your muscle. They can get stored in your adipose tissue or your fat tissue, shown in the middle, and they can also get stored in your liver. Now, ideally, if human beings were perfectly efficient creatures, what would happen is that all of the fat that you're putting in your mouth would then circulate to those tissues, and those tissues would utilize that fat brilliantly. Every single mole or every single molecule of fat that goes into your mouth would get burned, there would be no accumulation of fat, and there would be no problem. But human beings and mammals are not perfectly biologically efficient machines. And as a result of that, what ends up happening over the course of time is that fatty acids end up accumulating. So yes, it's true, you will burn more fatty acids on a ketogenic diet, you will burn more fatty acids on a low carbohydrate diet, but again, because we're not perfectly efficient animals, there's a net accumulation of fatty acids inside of both of those tissues. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, as soon as those tissues start to accumulate fat, insulin has a difficult time communicating with those tissues. There's actually insulin receptors which are located all over those tissues, and they are waiting for insulin to arrive. When those tissues and those cells when they accumulate fat over the course of time, those insulin receptors are negatively inhibited, and as a result of that, they simply cannot respond to insulin like they used to. So as a result of that, glucose in your blood attempts to get into your liver and it attempts to get into your muscle, but it has a very difficult time doing so, again, because the receptors for insulin are not behaving. So as a result of that, glucose starts to accumulate inside of your blood, and a little bit turns into a lot. That means that your blood glucose goes up. At the same time, because your blood glucose has gone up, now beta cells inside of your pancreas start to secrete more insulin so that they can try and overpower this situation. Because ultimately, your beta cells are trying to protect your blood vessels from carrying too much glucose. So if there's too much glucose, then more insulin is produced. Now, this is what results. You end up with a blood stream that contains large amounts of insulin, large amounts of fatty acids, and large amounts of glucose. And as a result of this, you end up with three problems. Number one, you have an insulin-resistant liver. Number two, you have an insulin-resistant muscle. And then number three, your blood vessels may or may not, as we will see in a little bit, develop a condition called atherosclerosis, where the smooth muscle surrounding the blood vessels gets hardened. And you end up with arterial plaque that coats the inside of your endothelial layer, or the single cell layer on the lining of all blood vessels in your body. So, in other words, eating a diet that contains a significant amount of fat over the course of time ends up creating a state of insulin resistance in your muscle and your liver, and it ends up causing insult to the inside lining of your blood vessels. So, okay, now what happens if you go onto a low-fat diet? Well, in a low-fat ecosystem, fatty acids are no longer the predominant fuel source. As you'll see here, glucose is the predominant fuel source, shown in blue. So, insulin's job, again, is to signal to the tissue, say, hey, muscle, hey, liver, there's some glucose in the blood, do you want to take it up? And the tissues respond by saying, sure, I'll take it up. And the reason they can take it up is because there's only small amounts, or we'll say reasonable amounts, physiologically normal amounts of fatty acids that are present in both of those tissues. So as a result of that, glucose does not accumulate in your blood, it does not get trapped, and you do not develop high blood glucose, and your insulin concentrations can remain low. So this is the picture that results. Glucose can easily enter your liver, glucose can easily enter your muscle, and either be utilized and burned for energy, or it can be stored as glycogen. In either situation, both tissues end up accumulating glucose over time, which has no negative consequences, and it keeps glucose out of your blood. That means that you have an insulin-sensitive liver, an insulin-sensitive muscle, and what's known as an elastic vasculature, or a vasculature that does not develop atherosclerotic plaques over the course of time. Another way to think about this whole process is just a series of dominoes. So you'll see that in this situation, we have 4 dominoes. The first domino is an excess of dietary fat. And an excess of dietary fat effectively means anything more than 15% of your total calories in dietary fat. Domino number 2, as soon as that happens, domino number 2 gets tipped over. Domino number 2 is that insulin receptors start to become dysfunctional. You and I would love to be able to block that from happening, but that is a very important process that happens in all mammals. Domino number 3 means that as soon as those insulin receptors become dysfunctional, they can no longer respond to insulin, therefore glucose has to remain in your blood. It cannot go anywhere else. Finally, the 4th domino is that because your blood glucose has increased, you might find that your need for oral medication goes up, or your need for insulin increases as well. So one more time, the accumulation of fat in muscle and liver is what causes glucose to get trapped in your blood. That is the cellular basis of insulin resistance, so please make sure that you write that down.
Okay, so let's look at a few testimonials here from our coaching program. So this is Patricia. She came to us because she was doing a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. She actually learned about us through a Facebook group that was actually making fun of us, and she decided to check it out. So she came in our program, and her A1C at the beginning was 7.1%, and it dropped to 5.6%. In 8 months, she lost 42 pounds. This is actually a picture from 2016, and she's actually lost more weight since. Her carbohydrate intake, she started out at 30 grams, and on our program, she's eating 500 grams of carbohydrates per day. And you would think that she would need more insulin with that dramatic carbohydrate intake, and that is not the case. Her total insulin actually dropped. So she's eating a significantly larger amount of carbohydrates, taking less total insulin, losing weight, and feeling amazing. That is insulin sensitivity. So here's another example. Jessica came to us. She was trying the low carbohydrate program, wasn't giving her the results she was looking for. She comes and joins our program. So she starts out, she was doing it very strict, having 20 grams of carbohydrates per day. This is a type 1 diabetic here. Patricia was a type 1.5 diabetic. So Jessica here, she's starting out with a basal of 20 units, bolus of 17.5. If you look at the math on the screen here, we have a total of 20 grams per day, 37.5 units, that's 0.5 sensitivity. She comes in our program. This is just in the first 3 months. Her carbohydrates intake goes up to 325 grams per day. Her basals goes down, her bolus goes down. When you see the math, now her 24-hour insulin sensitivity, do the calculations here, is 11.2. So how do you measure the change? The math is shown on the screen. In 3 months, this is a 20x improvement in insulin sensitivity. And after 6 months, the changes become even more dramatic. Now we're talking about a 23.4 times increase. This is a huge difference, an order of magnitude here. So this is very significant, and this is just another example of truly improving insulin sensitivity. Her ability to consume glucose from whole, natural, healthy foods, foods that we are designed to eat, her ability to consume those foods and take that glucose out of the bloodstream into her cells improved dramatically because her diet was low in fat. that's the change. If she was somewhere in the middle, she was having, moderate carbohydrate intake and moderate fat intake, that's the swampland. You don't want to be there. Nothing amazing is going to happen there. So again, you can see this calculation. If you are living with type 1 diabetes or type 1.5, this calculation is effective. If you are not living with one of those conditions and you're like a type 2 and you've measured your C-peptide and you know that you are producing a significant amount of insulin, then we need to go back to those other tests that Cyrus was talking about earlier to truly measure whether or not you are insulin resistant or not. And the most common one is the oral glucose tolerance test. That is something you can get ordered from your doctor, and it's really, really important to know this information and measure your progress as you try different things.
Okay, so what I want to go into right now is a little indication here of what types of changes in insulin sensitivity you can experience while adopting a low-fat, plant-based whole foods approach. Okay, so we read in the scientific literature a lot. People say, "Well, I went onto a ketogenic diet or I went onto a low-carbohydrate diet, and my insulin sensitivity increased." From a biological perspective, it is nearly impossible for your insulin sensitivity to increase. What happened most likely is that your glucose, your 24-hour average glucose went down, and your 24-hour average insulin went down. So you're effectively not eating carbohydrate, which results in less confusion and less blood glucose variation. That is a completely true statement, and everybody who has attempted a ketogenic diet, or most people who have attempted a ketogenic diet, will experience that. However, if we go back to measuring insulin resistance, what you see here on the screen is the carbohydrate to insulin ratio over the course of 24 hours. People who come into our program start with a carbohydrate to insulin ratio at about a 3-to-1. So that's that first circle over on the left. Within 3 months, their carbohydrate to insulin ratio climbs to greater than 15. And within 6 to 12 months, their carbohydrate to insulin ratio is usually somewhere around 22 to 23 grams per unit. And that's very important to understand, because this change in insulin sensitivity is not 20%. It's not 30%. Quantitatively, the change in insulin sensitivity is so dramatic, it almost looks unreal. We're talking about changes that are on the order of about 600 to 700%. So you see here on the y-axis now, we're looking at your percent improvement in insulin sensitivity. And individuals who adopt a truly low-fat diet increase their insulin sensitivity by almost 500% in the first 3 months, and then that increases to slightly more than 700% over the course of 12 months. So this is really important to understand, that even if you are on a ketogenic diet and you do increase your insulin sensitivity, which from a biological perspective is nearly impossible, your changes in insulin sensitivity are likely not going to be nearly as dramatic as they would be following a low-fat approach. Okay, so here's something that's really important. Now, we've talked about the diabetes aspects of a ketogenic diet, or the diabetes aspects, let's say, of a low-carbohydrate diet versus a low-fat diet. Now, people who adopt a ketogenic diet absolutely experience a lot of positive change. We will absolutely not deny that. It's shown in the research, and when you talk to individuals, you take a look at their 24-hour blood glucose profile, it is a flat line. That is fantastic. So people who adopt a truly low carbohydrate diet, less than 30 grams of carbohydrate per day, will experience a reduced hemoglobin A1C, reduced blood glucose variability, reduced total insulin use, reduced LDL cholesterol, and dramatic weight loss. You guys have probably read stories like this of an individual who's gone onto a ketogenic diet and they've lost anywhere from 30 to 150 pounds, and they did it in a short period of time. And as a result of that, they notice a whole bunch of improvements. They might have gotten off of oral medication, might have gotten off of insulin altogether. Their blood glucose is a flat line. They have energy, and their cholesterol also went down at the same time. All of this is true. I'm not going to deny any of it. This usually happens very rapidly as soon as someone transitions to a ketogenic diet, simply because they are not consuming carbohydrate. That's the reason why it happens. In the long term, however, the picture can change. If you look at the research, you delve into the actual studies on long-term effects of ketogenic diets, this is what you will find. First things first, ketogenic diets were originally developed for individuals living with epilepsy, because what researchers found is that when they took an epileptic individual, they put them on a ketogenic diet, their frequency of seizures went down. So clearly it was a very attractive strategy for individuals living with epilepsy, and as a result of that, they decided that they wanted to investigate it further. Then further investigation showed that it can flatline blood glucose, and now it becomes a potentially valuable tool for the diabetes community. However, in this paper showing the effects of short-term and long-term complications of those of epileptic individuals, what they found is that both in the short term and in the long term, we see a lot of adverse consequences, including dehydration, gastrointestinal discomfort. These are GI dysfunctions. Infectious disease, increased risk for infectious disease, increased risk for hypertriglyceridemia, which is elevated triglycerides, increased risk for hypercholesterolemia, which is elevated blood cholesterol, elevated uric acid concentrations, and the onset of osteoporosis. Now, these complications start within the first 6 months, and over the course of time, these complications can become more and more grim. Now, in another paper, in which investigators tried to understand the role of low carbohydrate diets in Swedish women, what they found was that the cardiovascular effects of a low carbohydrate diet were disastrous. Here's what they found. The columns that you see here grade different diets from a grade of less than 6 all the way to greater than 16. And what that score represents is the low carbohydrate, high protein score. So that means that the lower the diet is in carbohydrate, the further it is on the right side of this table. So this greater than 16 column that you see right here over on the right, this column represents the lowest carbohydrate intake of all of these diets. And you'll see for all cardiovascular diseases, if you start here, the incidence rate from a medium carbohydrate diet to a low carbohydrate diet increases significantly. Risk for cardiovascular diseases increase as your carbohydrate intake goes down. Number 2, your risk for ischemic heart disease significantly increases as the carbohydrate content of your diet goes down. Number 3, your risk for stroke increases significantly from a medium carbohydrate diet to a low carbohydrate diet. And finally, peripheral artery disease. The risk for peripheral artery disease significantly increases. It almost quadruples as the carbohydrate intake goes down. So this is very important to understand, because what we said earlier is that insulin resistance is a huge risk factor for those living for your cardiovascular health. So if insulin resistance increases, which we have seen that it can absolutely do on a low carbohydrate and ketogenic diet, then it's important to understand that the tissue that takes one of the largest beatings is your heart and your vasculature. Now, there's a term called all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality means death from any cause. And some investigators have researched the effect of low carbohydrate diets on your risk for all-cause mortality. Now, this study was done at Harvard. And what they found is that a low carbohydrate diet based on animal products and animal sources was associated with higher all-cause mortality in both men and women, whereas a vegetable-based low carbohydrate diet was associated with lower all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease. So that's very important to understand. This right here suggests that all ketogenic diets themselves are not created equal, and that ketogenic diets that increase your consumption of animal products increase your risk of death from any cause, versus ketogenic diets that are truly plant-based actually decrease your risk for cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality, and that's very important. Finally, research that was done in Japan shows that low carbohydrate diets again significantly increase all-cause mortality. As you can see here highlighted in yellow, the risk of all-cause mortality among those eating low carbohydrate diets was significantly elevated. If you search through the research, you'll see this over and over and over again. I wish this wasn't the case. I really do. But the fact of the matter is that because low carbohydrate diets trigger insulin resistance, they increase your risk for heart disease, and they can increase your risk for all-cause mortality. So if you look at all the conditions here that can result in the long term from a low carbohydrate, from a ketogenic approach, what you will see in the short term, again, there are dramatic improvements in body weight and dramatic improvements in glucose metabolism. But in the long term, due to the fact that insulin resistance has been increased, you end up with an increased risk for all heart disease related conditions. You end up with negative glucose metabolism, which is increased insulin resistance, an effectively diminished carbohydrate tolerance, and fatty liver. You end up with increased inflammation, which is increased risk for cancer. And maybe you guys have seen that the World Health Organization listed processed meats as being class 1 carcinogens. And that's very important because the more animal products you consume, the higher your risk for any version of cancer. You also end up with an increased risk for kidney damage and kidney failure. And as far as your overall health is concerned, people following low carbohydrate / ketogenic diets lose weight in the short term, then their weight stops, then they stop losing weight, and oftentimes they end up gaining weight in the long term. That is accompanied by low energy, sometimes impaired digestive status, whether it's gastroparesis and constipation, chronic constipation, and thus the need for fiber supplements, and or very intense food cravings. So again, let's go back to the basics here. Insulin resistance is a central node. It increases your risk for all chronic disease. Therefore, we have to, if we really want to get to the root cause and minimize your risk for minimize your risk for chronic diseases in general, then minimizing your risk for insulin resistance and becoming insulin sensitive is one of your most powerful strategies.
Okay, so now that we've covered all this material, let's talk about how do you actually maximize your insulin sensitivity using food. So how is it actually done? It's quite simple. It's a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet. So on the screen, you see pictures of vibrant, colorful, plant-based meals. So in this presentation, Cyrus has covered very clearly how it's fat stored in tissues that are not designed to store fat that leads to insulin resistance. So if you follow a diet where you're not eating excess fat, so all these foods you see, these whole foods, have fat in them. Every food you eat has fat in it, every whole food. So we're not talking about a no-fat diet here. We're talking about a low-fat diet where the fat comes in the form of these whole foods that you see on the screen. So we have divided up the best foods to eat for maximizing your insulin sensitivity into 3 different categories: green light, yellow light, and red light. So let's look at the green light foods. First, we have fruits, non-starchy vegetables, starchy vegetables, beans, lentils, and peas, green leafy vegetables, intact whole grains, herbs, and spices. So these are foods that, when following our program, can be eaten in pretty much unlimited quantities. Of course, there's always small exceptions here or there, but in general, these foods are low in their calorie density, high in nutrient density, and can be eaten in large quantities, no limitations, no restrictions. In the yellow light category, we have nuts, seeds, avocados, coconuts, so this is coconut meat, coconut water is fine, olives, pastas, pulse alternatives, sprouted bread. So these are foods that you could have small quantities of and be okay, and still get your body to a place of being very sensitive to insulin. But these foods have to be moderated. You can't be having large volumes. These are not foods you can eat in unlimited quantities. The pastas are processed, even the sprouted breads. And these foods, the calorie density is getting very high. And it's also a problem for weight management, which is important also for insulin sensitivity. In the red light category, these are foods that should be minimized or ideally completely avoided. These are dairy products, eggs, processed meats, red meat, white meat, poultry, fish and shellfish, oils of any kind, which you see here is different than the whole olives that was in the yellow light category. So oils of any kind are not recommended. Refined sugars, and then of course pastas and breads. Again, these are refined foods. Most of these foods have dairy and they're high fat foods anyway, so it's a combination which is just terrible. So what do these foods look like? What are these meals? How are they presented? How can you eat them? Of course, you don't have to eat them all individually. They come in these beautiful foods you see right here, these beautiful meals. So you see I have a bean stew in the upper right corner. There's I think it's a chickpea burger in the middle. You got a corn dish in the upper left. There's a soup. You have whole fruit. On this next page, we have more whole fruit and vegetables. Our program is about eating colorful, vibrant, whole plant foods full of water, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients in large quantities. You get to really enjoy your food. You get to eat a lot. You can eat as frequently as you want as long as you're eating the right foods. So, put in the chat box, guys. We want to hear from you. If you want to hear about our program, if you want to learn about the program that we've created for working with people, type yes in the chat box. We want to know if we should continue and proceed with talking about our program. We'd love to hear from you. We don't want to explain and talk about stuff that you don't want to hear about. So let us know in the chat box. Should we tell you about the program that we've created and some, you saw the testimonials early in the presentation from clients. They all went through this program. So I see a lot of yeses coming in. That's great. Love to see the enthusiasm. This is terrific.
Looks like Zach is pretty excited. He put yes.
He put a lot of yeses
19 times.
That's terrific. Love it.
Zach, let's listen up here.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the program that we've created. So this is the Mastering Diabetes online group coaching program, and this is where we teach people how to implement these principles. The science that we have covered today, how to implement it in your life, in your body. So the first part of our program is a custom-built online course. So this is something you can access from any device that has the internet, whether that's your desktop computer, whether that's your tablet, whether that's your mobile phone. You can access this anywhere. And inside the course, we have everything you need to transition from wherever you're at. Every person starts in a different place to where you want to go. What are your goals? How far do you want to take it? This program is designed to help you do that. So in the beginning, we start out with a goal setting process. And so we can establish where you want to go, and we have a better idea of how to help you get there. Then we move into changing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Some people are just brand new to this. You start with just changing breakfast. Once you've mastered that, then you move into changing lunch. Once you've got that figured out, you move into changing dinner. Some people, they've already changed all 3 meals and just need to make some tweaks. So we work through that. Lesson 2 here, we have the decision tree. This is a super, super important lesson for people who are using insulin and people who are not using insulin. It's a great way. It's our format, our version of a logbook where you document everything that's going on, and that's how we can help you make changes and you can see patterns. We have the pantry raid, getting rid of all the bad things in your environment, making it so your home is a successful, safe place for eating well. Here in lesson 4, we talk about intermittent fasting and your basal insulin, which is huge, again, for people using insulin. But intermittent fasting in general is important for everybody, something Cyrus has spent many years researching when he was getting his PhD. It's really important information. Then, of course, exercise is important, moving your body. It doesn't have to be strenuous. So we help you develop a routine that's going to work for you. It can be as simple as walking. But again, it's got to be something you love, something you enjoy. You go through whole exercise. We have exercise lessons if you want to just follow through and work out with Cyrus. It's really great. We move into logistics and food buying. This is super important. You have to know how to buy food, how to ripen food. You can learn about new foods, and we're adding new lessons about individual fruits on a regular basis. We have lessons on social situations. There's actually some things missing on the screen. We have a 10-minute meal section showing you video tutorials on how to make meals in 10 minutes or less, whether that's a fruit-based meal or a starch-based meal, and we're adding new ones every single week. So it's always growing and things are current and in season. So the second part of the Mastering Diabetes online group coaching is a private Facebook community. And this is a community of people from all over the world, hundreds of people going through the same transition that you're going through. Everybody here has the same common goal. How do we successfully implement a low-fat, plant-based diet and move our body on a consistent basis? We know it's tough out there. We know there's challenges. It's great to have a community to support you. So you can see posts like this. When you're in a group where people are sharing success and what they're doing and you have the accountability, you can't help but have this type of positive results rub off on you. It's really, really powerful. And it's really the highlight of Cyrus and our day. We just love to come in here and see great successful things coming in every single day. So let's talk about a person living with type 2 diabetes, Homero. So Homero came to us with an A1C of 7.5%, and in just 4 months, dropped his A1C over a point. It's continuing to drop. He's lost 23 pounds, and his carbohydrate intake went from 40 grams per day to 320. And again, losing weight, and he stopped taking oral medications. That's amazing. This is what we're talking about when we say improving insulin sensitivity, maximizing insulin sensitivity, whether it's a type 1.5, a type 2, or here with Homero, or type 1, or Homero with a type 2. We see these results. He doesn't need medication, his glucose is coming down, and he's eating way more carbohydrates. This is consistent. It happens every single time when things are implemented properly. So now we have another type 1 story here. Sharon, she came to us, A1C is 6.4%, changes her carbohydrate intake from 85 to 410, and reduces her insulin use. 40% less total insulin, stops a totally unnecessary medication, Insulin, and she loses 26 pounds in 4 months. This is totally typical, like Cyrus showed on that graph. You saw that green line of the insulin and sensitivity improvements. This is totally typical when the program is implemented properly. So, the third part of our program, we also have monthly Q&A calls. So it's a live call. Cyrus and I are on these calls, and you can actually see us. It's a video. It's a little bit software different than this, and we can actually see everybody's face. So if you want to ask us questions, you can turn on the video on your cell phone or your computer, and we can see you, and we will answer your questions. So every month, you submit questions beforehand, and then new questions come up on the call, and we stay there until your questions are answered. That's the way this whole program is designed. So the same thing with our Facebook group. We have moderators in there. So of course, you're learning from other people, going through the same process as you, but we have moderators in there, Cyrus and I are in there, and we are committed to answering questions within 24 hours. So whatever question you have, whatever's going on with your blood glucose, whatever food question you have, recipe question, traveling question, dealing with family, social situations, if you ask us a question, we are going to write back to you. We're with you every step of the way. So, if you sign up for our program within 48 hours of this webinar ending, you get an extra bonus. So this is access to our Mastering Diabetes Online Summit. It costs $97 to have access to this. And you get access to the whole thing. So there's over 30 interviews with leading experts from all over the world. So we have Neil Barnard. You see he's in this picture here. He wrote Prevent and Reverse Diabetes. He's talking about type 2 diabetes in that book. He also has a nice chapter about type 1. And we interviewed him about the science of insulin resistance. A lot of stuff we covered here, but there's always nuanced details. Michael Greger from nutritionfacts.org. Dean Ornish. You might have heard his name. We have Caldwell Esselstyn, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Joel Furman. Garth Davis, author of Proteinaholic. We have interviews with New York Times bestselling authors sharing information on a wide range of topics. So the summit is a wealth of information. It's yours to keep for life. You can download the material to your computer, listen to it when you're not connected to the internet, when you're traveling on an airplane. You get audio files, video files, so you can access the information easily. So how does our program work? How do you sign up? It's a $29 per month program. You You don't have to sign any contracts. There's no commitment. You stay as long as you find it valuable and it's helping you meet your health goals. So it's $29 per month. If you sign up today, we have there's a tab called Offers in the webinar, in the program here, and you can click the button that says Join Now for $29 a month. You click that, and that's how you can register for the program, and you will get access to the All Access Pass for free, and you get access to everything we just covered. So that's the online course where we're adding new material every single week, new recipes, new interviews with experts, new lessons. It's always growing and having more tools and resources for you guys to optimize your health. Then you get that private Facebook group where you get access to our team, and Cyrus and I are in there also answering questions and making sure that you have the support every step of the way. No question goes unanswered. We are committed to your success. Everything is we are so aligned in our goals, it's not even funny. We want you to succeed and you want to reach your health goals. We want to support you every step of the way. So click the image on the screen to get started, and you get that All Access Pass for free if you sign up in the next 48 hours.
So I see that there's a lot of questions coming through, and Robbie and I will literally stay as long as necessary so that we can answer your questions. I see there's a lot of agreement. It almost seems like there's two types of people that are attending this webinar. There's people who understand the low-fat approach and are probably practicing it themselves, and they're seeing good results, which is fantastic. And then there's a lot of people who are following a low-carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet, and they're still slightly, they're asking some questions that could use some clarification. So let's go through a couple of those questions, because I want to make sure, again, just like Robbie said at the beginning of the webinar, we highly respect all of you guys, regardless of the diet that you choose to follow. Robbie and I are not here to point a finger at you and say you're wrong, you're not smart, that you don't deserve good information. We're here to help. We're here to make sure that you have the tools necessary to really improve your diabetes health. And so if there's some information that's confusing, it's totally fine. Let's just make sure that we're all on the same page and that we can find a way to have a conversation that's based on evidence and not necessarily based on pseudoscience. So one of the questions that I saw here was that people are confused about how is it possible? Okay, if I adopt a ketogenic diet and you're telling me that I become more insulin resistant, well then how come my insulin use is so low, right? Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe you know somebody else who's already experienced this. Okay, let's go back to the basics. Suppose you adopt a ketogenic diet. You adopt a ketogenic diet, your blood glucose flatlines and your insulin use goes significantly down, or your insulin production, if you're living with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, your insulin production is very low, okay? The question we're really asking here is, if you were to eat a substantial amount of carbohydrate, what would happen? That's another way of thinking about insulin resistance, okay? So let me ask you that question again. If you were to eat, let's say, a meal that contained 50 grams of carbohydrate at one sitting, what would happen to you? Okay? If you are insulin sensitive, then that would mean that you could consume 50 grams of carbohydrate, and if you're insulin dependent, you would need a very small amount of insulin, like 1 or 2 units. And if you're not insulin dependent, then your insulin, the amount of insulin that your pancreas secretes would be very low, and your blood glucose would stay in range. So again, what that means is that you can consume 50 grams of carbohydrate and it wouldn't negatively impact your blood glucose or your insulin use. If you are living with insulin resistance, which is what happens on the ketogenic diet, if you were to consume 50 grams of carbohydrate, what would happen to you? Do you need large amounts of insulin? Or if you're non-insulin dependent, would your blood glucose spike? If the answer is yes, then that means that you're likely living in an insulin resistant state. So simply by avoiding carbohydrate altogether, you're not solving the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is that you have eaten yourself into a carbohydrate intolerant state. You've eaten yourself to a point where you cannot consume carbohydrates anymore. And that's a problem because carbohydrates break down to glucose, and your brain is 100% dependent on glucose, and your muscle and your liver are reliant on glucose. So if you're limiting your carbohydrate intake, then you force your body to synthesize ketone bodies as a backup fuel. This is a backup fuel that your brain primarily uses in order to continue working. So my question here is really this. Just ask yourself a simple question. What would happen to you if you ate a meal containing 50 grams of carbohydrate, okay? Would you need a lot of insulin or a little bit of insulin? Would your blood glucose spike or would your blood glucose not spike, okay? If you need a lot of insulin and or if your blood glucose would spike, that right there indicates that you're living with insulin resistance. And that's important to understand.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of questions. I think we could, I guess I'll just start with the top and just start going down. So somebody's asking, can you address the apparent long-term success of Dr. Bernstein? How was he himself seen to have followed his own ketogenic diet for so many years without seemingly negative results? Is there a genetic component where some people will never experience negative consequences of that type of diet? So that's a great question. So Dr. Bernstein is another person we totally respect. And, you know, quite frankly, any person who is also living with type 1 diabetes, which me and Cyrus are both living with, there's a certain amount of just sort of kinship and respect right off the bat. And everybody's just out there doing the best they can. And Dr. Bernstein has a tremendous story of where he started from, where he is now. And so the answer we'll give to that is that, again, the whole point of this webinar, so you're right, he doesn't, as far as we know, no serious long-term complications that we addressed in this program. So the percentage of people that are able to get away with that is not as good, according to the research that we just went through. But more importantly, the one factual thing that we can all hopefully agree on, and the research is pretty clear, is that that program is still putting him and everybody else in following the ketogenic diet in an insulin-resistant state. Dr. Bernstein and people eating less than 30 grams of carbohydrates per day cannot tolerate eating 2 bananas in one sitting. Their glucose would skyrocket. They would need a large dose of insulin to get things to come down. They simply cannot tolerate it. So let's pretend somebody's eating 30 grams of carbohydrate per day, and let's say they're taking 10 total units of insulin. That's a 3-to-1 ratio, 24-hour insulin sensitivity ratio of 3-to-1. You can see videos on YouTube of Cyrus and myself, exactly what we eat, all the insulin we're injecting, our glucose readings, and you can see us eating closer to around 700 grams of carbohydrate per day, and I'm using roughly 40 units of insulin. Cyrus, for the same amount of carbohydrates, uses roughly 25 units of insulin. You do the math. We're talking about a 24-hour ratio of somewhere to mine's something like 20-to-1, and Cyrus is somewhere around 27-to-1, something like that, in that ballpark. And that is just, to us, is so clear and so obvious. I don't understand how that could be confusing. The insulin sensitivity is dramatically different. And so that's our reply there. Okay, so somebody's saying no more than 50% of fat a day. Yeah, 15% of calories from fat. Yes, that is the maximum amount of fat we're talking about. Another way to look at it is for most people, if you did 30 grams of total grams of fat per day, that would put you in a good territory. Closer to 20 is a little bit better. But again, you can use nutrition software to figure that out. So let's see here. How long to see a dramatic change in insulin sensitivity? So it can happen very quickly. We're talking days. For type 1s who join our program, come to our retreats, we do 4-day retreats. We just finished our 5th one. And every single retreat, people who are producing enough insulin, sufficient amounts of insulin, see dramatic changes. So it happens quickly. And for type 1s, I mean, you know, obviously they're measuring they know exactly how much insulin they're injecting, they know exactly how many carbohydrates they're eating, and they know their glucose values. So it's very easy for us to objectively assess insulin sensitivity, and for them, changes happen very, very quickly. There's an article about it on the Mango Man Nutrition website. We have an article on some people, I think it was 4 teenagers that went to our retreat. than what happened to their insulin sensitivity in just 4 days. It's really, really remarkable. Let's see, what other question do we have here? Let's see. Excellent. Nancy, we're really excited to work with you. Can't wait to have you on board. Somebody's asking, what about whey protein? Dr. John Young promotes protein shake.
Okay, what's the question now?
So just asking, is whey protein okay?
What about whey protein? Okay, Dr. Young promotes his protein shake. Okay, so whey is derived from dairy. Whey contains the predominant protein in whey is actually called casein. And casein has been shown through a series of studies done by T. Colin Campbell, who wrote the China study. He showed that people who consume more casein and animals that consume more casein actually increase their risk for tumor formation and tumor development. So if you choose to eat casein, that is your choice. However, what we recommend is that you minimize or completely eliminate your use of casein, because that right there can significantly increase your risk for cancer in the long term, and nobody necessarily wants that.
Okay, let's see what other questions we can find in here. All right, before I join, I want to make sure that I can have success even if I don't need 400 grams of carbs per day. Yes, that's a great question. So I think Angie's asking, yes. Our program is you don't eat an arbitrary amount of carbohydrates per day. You listen to your body, you eat what feels good, and you eat no more than necessary. We're trying to get people to an energy balance. Depending, if you want to lose weight, obviously a little bit less, but we're not wanting people losing, about 1 to 2 pounds per week if you need to lose weight. We're not trying to have, really, really huge swings in a short period of time. We're looking for long-term success here. So yes, you don't need to eat 400 grams of carbohydrates per day in order to succeed on your program. Absolutely not. Majority of our clients, I would say, are not eating that many. Okay, so somebody's asking about how they can get enough protein.
Okay, great question. It's one of my favorite questions. So in the world of plant-based nutrition, you hear this all the time. People are very curious about, vegetables and fruits that don't contain protein, therefore I'm going to be protein deficient. Now, it turns out that there's a couple of misnomers in that statement that I just made. Number one, all fruits and vegetables, all whole foods contain protein. Whether you're talking about broccoli, whether you're talking about a banana, whether you're talking about, what's another food? Beans and lentils. It doesn't really matter. All of them contain protein. It's just they contain protein in different quantities. So protein-rich foods in the animal world in the plant world are foods like beans, lentils, peas, quinoa, brown rice. They contain more protein than do foods like bananas and oranges. What ends up happening is that over the course of 24 hours, as you consume, if you decided to consume a fully plant-based diet, which we fully advocate, what would happen is that the sum total of all the protein that you're consuming from these individual foods would add up to be sufficient. So what is sufficient? A simple way to calculate how much protein your body actually needs on a daily basis is to take your ideal body weight in pounds and multiply that by 0.3. It's that simple. So I'll do my calculation. I weigh 160 pounds, and if I take 160 and I multiply that by 0.3, I will get 160 times 0.3 is, 160 times 0.3 is 48 grams. So what that means is that if I consume 48 grams on a daily basis, I will have an adequate amount of protein, and that will be plenty. It's very easy to do that on a plant-based diet. In fact, protein deficiencies don't actually exist. There's only one condition that's a protein deficiency. It's called kwashiorkor. And it is the only way that you actually develop that condition is if you are malnourished. So if your ribs are popping out through your skin and you have absolutely no lean body mass on your body, then the chances are you're protein deficient. But other than that, it's not going to happen.
Terrific. Now, Beth is asking, can you register via check? So we don't accept checks, but you can pay online with a credit card, or you can use PayPal, and then you'll get billed monthly. So that's very easy to register there. Just click the link in the offers tab.
And there's also one more thing too, which is that we recently created a yearly option because people were asking us for that. So you could choose to pay $29 per month, which over the course of a year is about $348. We're also giving you a 30% discount. So if you choose to purchase an annual subscription, right off the bat, then the price drops by over $100. So if that's an option for you, then go ahead and take that.
It's a great way to commit to yourself. I'm going to do this for a whole year and save some money. So if somebody's asking and said they purchased the All Access Pass, but they don't know how to access it. So what you can do is email team@masteringdiabetes.org, and we'll make sure you get access. Somebody says, should we gradually increase carbs and fruit, or just go for it and eat? So that's a great question. That's something we would work on individually based on what type of diabetes are you living with, what type of glucose readings are you seeing right now, how active are you, and really take it from there. So that's something we can help you with in our Facebook group after we learn more about you. How do you recommend approaching endocrinologists about starting this program? That's a great question. So you really got to assess how receptive you think your endocrinologist is going to be. I've been through, I think, since moving around over the past 10 years, at least 3 different endocrinologists. And some of them, they didn't ask me about my diet, so I didn't really talk to them about my diet. They just checked all my numbers. They did the regular blood work. Everything checks off well. My A1C is good. They write the prescription, and that's it. So it can be simple. But if you really want to talk to your doctor, you could send them our way. Hey, learn from these guys and check out some books and see if they're interested. So I'm going to scroll back to the top here and see if I'm missing any new questions. Yeah, there's new questions coming. So somebody goes, how do I choose to commit to a year now? Okay, so if you've already paid and you want to change to a yearly, simply email us. Just email team@masteringdiabetes.org and we will take care of you.
And one thing I want to state too is that we give you, if you purchase the year-long subscription, we give you a 30-day grace period, meaning that if within the first 30 days you are not satisfied, simply email us, team@masteringdiabetes.org. We'll give you all of your money back, no questions asked. It's never happened to us before, but we want to make sure that you have the assurance that you have a 30-day guarantee on this. So I don't want you going into this thinking there's a lot of risk, because in reality, we give you plenty of time to try it out.
And so Joshua was asking, would you recommend eating no fat at all? I mean, the answer is no, because all whole foods contain fat, including essential fatty acids. So this is not a no fat program. It's not that we're afraid of fat or anything like that. It's about eating the appropriate amount that leads to the best insulin sensitivity. Can you get protein from leafy vegetables? Absolutely. There's significant amounts of protein in whole leafy vegetables. So somebody's asking, what is intermittent fasting? A brief summary of intermittent fasting is it can be a wide range of how much time. It's basically a period of time where you're just drinking water or tea. It's super basic and quite effective though. Let's see here. I have type 2 diabetes. I recently became a vegan, but I'm interested in starting a whole food vegan diet. Before I was hospitalized with diverticulitis with a referred version. I am currently on a low fiber diet. Okay, so how about this person struggling with
diverticulitis? Okay. I was going to be about interested in starting a whole food diet before I was hospitalized with diverticulitis with a perforation. I'm currently on a low fiber diet, and next week I can be. Yeah, in fact, will this program be okay for me? Okay, so Elizabeth, you're talking about diverticulitis, which is it can be a very challenging condition because we're talking about a perforation or an outpouching or perforation in your large intestine. Eating high fiber foods can irritate the inside lining of your large intestine. So what I would recommend is we can work with you through the Facebook group. We can make sure that we're helping you out and giving you personal guidance. What we will likely have to do is increase your fiber content over the course of time. So we can steer you towards foods that tend to be slightly lower in their fiber content, and then we can ramp that up over the course of time. But avoiding fiber-rich foods is certainly not going to improve your long-term health, and it's definitely not going to improve the health of your colon. There are studies that show over and over and over again that as you adopt a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, the microbiome, the 9 trillion bacteria in your large intestine undergo a complete turnover. So they change from meat-eating bacteria or animal product-eating bacteria to plant product-eating bacteria. And as a result of that, that sends, they manufacture short-chain fatty acids and compounds that feed tissues all throughout your body. So the net effect is you eat more fiber-rich foods, those bacteria they propagate, and then as a result of that, they're secreting compounds that are then anti-inflammatory compounds that decrease total body inflammation. So point being is that by transitioning to a whole food diet, and we do it in a stepwise manner, we can get you significant improvement in your colon health and your total body health at the same time.
Excellent. Let's see if I got any new questions coming in here. Somebody's asking, is almond milk all right? Yes, almond milk is okay. You don't want to have too much of it, but in general, it works just fine. You need to put on about 10 pounds. I need more protein. So if you put on 10 pounds, you're definitely going to have to learn to eat more, and you got to work out.
Definitely.
That's going to be the key to gaining 10 pounds. So let's see, what else we got here?
Here's a question about how does insulin resistance cause PCOS? So Nor, if you're still in the room, this is going to be a really important question because you're the one that asked it. So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is a condition that happens to females when they develop cysts on their ovaries. And that can affect a whole bunch of processes in their body. The root cause of PCOS is an overproduction of androgens. Androgens are male hormones. Testosterone is the main player. So what happens in individuals, in ladies who develop PCOS, is they're over-secreting testosterone and they're under-secreting estrogen. And as a result of that, they can end up developing facial hair growth, they can end up with acne, they can end up with insulin resistance, and it increases their risk for diabetes. And on top of that, they end up with ovarian cysts, which can impede their menstrual cycles. So point being, the major complicating factor in PCOS is insulin resistance. And I'm not saying that just because we're on a webinar about insulin resistance. If you look up PCOS and you type in insulin resistance, you will find that the research strongly supports that PCOS is exacerbated by an increasing state of insulin resistance. So what that means is that if you eat yourself towards insulin sensitivity, you can relieve a lot of the symptoms of PCOS. And we've had females who have come through our program and they have gained tremendous amounts of insulin sensitivity living with PCOS. And as a result of that, they've normalized their menstrual cycles, they've lost weight, they've increased their carbohydrate tolerance, and as some of those ladies have even gone on to become pregnant. And that's a good thing because PCOS can impede your ability to actually have a baby. So point being is your metabolic health is significantly improved, and your PCOS-related symptoms can also go down.
Okay, we've got people asking about EPA, DHA, omega-3s. The whole concept of being worried about essential fatty acids is so blown out of proportion. And you have a lot of people fear-mongering that our body is not able to do the conversions. So we eat the essential fatty acids, alpha-linoleic acid, and linoleic acid. You get those when you eat whole plant foods to meet your calorie needs. If you want an insurance policy, you can eat some flaxseed ground up and you can eat some chia seeds. But the body is designed to convert those essential fatty acids all the way up the chain to get to the top. And there's no evidence, there's no good peer-reviewed evidence to show that we as humans cannot do that. So when you're living healthy, you're following a healthy diet, you're not eating too many of the omega-6s, then you do the conversions, it's no problem. It's completely blown out of proportion, and people sell supplements with it. Okay, what else we got here? Let's see. Can someone without diabetes benefit from your program? The answer is, depending on what your goal is, if you have a goal of, hey, I want to follow this diet, I want to lose weight, I want to get more energy, you can totally do that. I mean, that's what this program leads to. So if you have specific goals, our goal is to help you achieve them. You don't necessarily have to have diabetes.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions about gallbladder health. This is actually really important because some people can develop gallbladder issues, including gallstones, over the course of time by eating a diet that is high in fat and protein. Here's how it works. Your gallbladder is nothing more than a storage warehouse for bile. That is its purpose. So bile is a substance that's produced primarily by your liver. Your liver creates bile, and then it sends bile up into your gallbladder to be stored in between meals. Then, the next time you go eat food, if those foods are high in fat and or high in protein, bile is a liquid that helps to emulsify and start to break down those fats and proteins. So the more fat and protein you eat, the more bile your liver produces, the more bile your gallbladder stores. Now, your bile can also start to accumulate fat over time in the same way that your liver and your muscles do as well. So over the course of time, individuals who experience gallbladder problems either have a fatty gallbladder, or they can develop cysts on their gallbladder, or they can end up overproducing bile. And as a result of all of that, they end up with either acid reflux, which can be very debilitating, or they end up with intense gastrointestinal pain. So if you're living with gallbladder issues, gallstones, or any type of gallbladder specific condition, then the primary method that you can use to minimize gallbladder storage of bile is to minimize your intake of fat and protein. So that way your liver makes less bile, your gallbladder stores less bile, and as a result of that, your gallbladder sees a significant amount of relief.
Okay, we got a question. If you put on muscle mass, can you expect a change in insulin sensitivity? Yes, absolutely. If you put on muscle, you're going to become more insulin sensitive. Somebody's asking, how much sugar in the form of fruits and tubers can we have a day for type 2 diabetic?
Okay, so let's not use the word sugar. I don't like the word sugar because sugar is a misnomer. Sugar is a white crystal that you get from a box. Sugar is a refined substance. We're not talking about consuming sugar. We are talking about consuming whole carbohydrates that break down into glucose. So if the question is how many grams of carbohydrate could you eat as a person living with type 2 diabetes, I would say the answer is somewhere as low as 250 grams per day and somewhere as high as about 600 grams per day. We have people with type 2 diabetes that eat within that range, some on the lower end, some on the higher end, and they all get incredible results. They lose body weight, they become insulin sensitive, and carbohydrates cease to be a problem in the long term.
Okay, someone says, can you share the amount of fat percentage you recommend per day? So talking about a maximum of 15% of calories from fat, closer to 10, you'll probably see some better results. If you want to look at it in grams, a total of 30 grams of fat works for most people. And then again, closer to 20 grams, it's going to get you some better results. Let's see here. Is the key component to limit fat calories under 15%? Yes, that would be a key component, and making sure that the foods you're consuming are whole plant foods. So you could mess around with your ratio and not be eating whole foods. So it's really important to eat whole foods like we showed in the green light, yellow light, red light section. What else do we have here? Let's see. I think we addressed the gallbladder stuff. Let's see. I think we might have gotten through pretty much everything. Right. Somebody's asking about committing to this lifestyle. Will metformin still be needed? In most cases, no. And they're asking why they would not need metformin, Cyrus.
Okay, so metformin's role, what metformin actually does is it decreases the amount of glucose that your liver is dumping into circulation at all times. In other words, your liver manufactures glucose. My liver manufactures glucose, your liver does, Robbie's liver does. So what happens in the case of type 2 diabetes and prediabetes is that as a result of accumulating too much fat inside of your liver becomes full of energy. So in reality, what your liver is trying to do is stop taking on energy and or ditch whatever energy it has. So it can't, as your liver accumulates fat over the course of time, and you develop an insulin-resistant liver / fatty liver, your liver tries to get rid of fuel, and it gets rid of fuel by making more lipoprotein particles and therefore increasing your cholesterol level. And you also end up secreting more glucose into the blood. That by itself can raise your blood glucose levels, and that's not what we're looking for. So you take metformin, and metformin decreases your liver's production of glucose, and that's a good thing. However, you can also decrease the production of glucose in your liver by simply unloading the amount of fat that it's been carrying for a long time. And you do that by minimizing your fat intake and adopting an active lifestyle. So you're basically going to use your low-fat, plant-based, whole food lifestyle as your new version of metformin, And we've had plenty of clients that have come to us taking as much as 2,000 milligrams of metformin per day, and they're able to get off of it within the first couple of months because they're losing weight and they're gaining insulin sensitivity.
Okay, somebody's asking about candida. They're worried about eating glucose because they've been struggling with candida.
Okay, so candida is a condition. It's basically yeast overgrowth that results from eating mainly refined sugar. So, like I said earlier, we're not talking about sugar. Sugar is a difficult word to use because sugar is a refined substance. Candida overgrowth thrives in a high sugar environment. Candida overgrowth does not thrive in a high whole carbohydrate environment. So if you're consuming whole carbohydrates that contain vitamins and minerals and fiber and water and antioxidants, then candida overgrowth is something that dissipates over the course of time. So make sure that when you're thinking about candida, you're not thinking about the effect of eating a fruit. You're talking about what's going to happen to me if I eat a candy bar. It'll grow if you eat refined sugars. It will subside if you consume whole plants.
Okay. Somebody was asking about preventing cancer. Is this approach good for preventing cancer? I mean, cancer is a tough condition. That's tougher than most, but in general, yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, eating healthy, whole food, plant-based diet is going to decrease your chances of cancer. I mean, Dr. McDougall, and you can see in Forks Over Knives some cases of people reversing their cancer. Ruth Heydrich is a great example. So it can definitely have an impact for sure.
And cancer is an inflammatory condition. So you cannot develop cancer unless you have a state of tissue level inflammation. So the tissue that has developed the cancer is inflamed, and a plant-based diet, and definitely a low-fat plant-based diet, minimizes total inflammation. And as a result of that, tissues all throughout your body end up reducing their inflammatory state and therefore reducing their risk for progressing existing cancer cells.
So somebody's asking if the program includes private personal consultations. This program does not include that. We do have some other programs. They're a little bit more expensive, and that involves more of the private stuff. You can email us if you feel like you need that level of support, team@masteringdiabetes.org. But in general, our Facebook support is really good, and most people, that gets them what they need. Which type of B12 do each of you use? B12 I use, it's a vegan safe brand one. It's the title of it, it's called Vegan Safe, and it's on Amazon. Super easy. Somebody's asking about iron deficiency.
Great question. So iron is one of there's three micronutrients that a lot of people get concerned about on a plant-based diet. They say, where do I get my iron? Where do I get my calcium? Where do I get my B12 from? Okay, so let's start at the top. B12 is only found in animal products, period. B12 is actually not from animals. It's from microbes in the soil. Animals that eat from the ground end up ingesting the microbes. They then develop B12 inside of their muscle. You eat their muscle, you end up with B12 inside of you. If you're eating a plant-based diet, just like Robbie said, you can get a supplement. It is very important to supplement with vitamin B12, and you cannot get around that problem. It's not even a problem. You simply just take a vitamin B12 pill once a day, and you're done. When it comes to calcium and iron, it is a misnomer that plant foods are deficient and or low in calcium and iron. There is an entire list of foods which are very iron rich, including things like dried apricots, beans, and lentils. Now, beans and lentils are also incredibly high in their calcium, as are green leafy vegetables. So if you go to the Forks Over Knives website, what you'll find is you'll find some information about how do I get my calcium, how do I get my iron. And the type of iron that you're going to be consuming is what's called non-heme iron, which is much less inflammatory than heme iron. So it's kind of a double whammy. You'll be getting enough and it'll be less insulting.
Excellent. Let's see. What else is in here? Mushrooms and spices, good. Oh, I think they're just saying it's good. Yeah, mushrooms and spices are great. Enjoy them. What else? I don't feel if I'm high or low or normal with my blood sugars. Will your program help me feel if my sugars are low or high? If you're not sure about that, maybe you can get a blood glucose meter and figure out and see if you have a problem. Maybe talk to your doctor. But our program gives people more energy, makes them really enjoy their food, and makes it so you're insulin sensitive. Let's see here. What about foods to reverse vascular disease? So yeah, this program is, so the low-fat, plant-based whole food diet is the only program in peer-reviewed research to show the reversal of heart disease. You can check this out in the summit, in the All Access Pass. We do an interview with Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. You can read his book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and learn all about that. Let's see. All right, type 1 have 3 scales depending on the time I eat. Yes, I test my blood sugars, and depending on the number, time, and if I'm eating or not, that's what I do. Do I have to learn how to carb count? Yeah, so our program definitely involves, you have to have carbohydrate awareness. You have to know how many carbohydrates. If you're type 1 and you are injecting insulin, then yes, we teach you how to use nutrition software. We teach the concept of go-to meals, where you, as you're adjusting to this diet, you're finding new meals that you love and enjoy, and you find the ones that you're okay with eating repeatedly, or you sort of create a cycle, and you know exactly how many carbohydrates are in that meal, and it doesn't need to get difficult or too much counting. You just intuitively know exactly how many carbohydrates are in that meal and how much to inject, and having a different ratio at breakfast, lunch, and dinner is totally normal for type 1s.
So Sally writes a question here. She says, I have no interest in the diabetes part because I do not have diabetes. Instead, I want to tweak my raw vegan diet from high fat, low carb to a proper high carb, low fat. Would your program help me? So Sally, if I understand you properly, it sounds like you are on a raw food diet, but you're on a high fat raw food diet. So probably something like the Gabriel Cousens approach. Even on that approach, even if you're consuming plant-based fats, you will not develop insulin resistance as quickly as you would if you were eating animal-based fats, which are primarily saturated. However, you absolutely will continue to develop insulin resistance over time. So if you're trying to minimize your risk for overall chronic disease, then the answer is yes. The program will definitely help. What you will gain the ability to do is eat carbohydrate-rich foods, and it may have a completely different effect on your mental state, your digestive status, your energy levels. So if you're not worried about your diabetes health, then if I were in your position, I might start to pay attention to those other health characteristics and see if those things are influenced by an increase in your carbohydrate intake. Another question. So Sarah said, why is fruit sugar good and refined sugar bad? Please answer. Here's why. Fruit sugar, I don't like the word sugar. Fruit carbohydrate, whole carbohydrate, comes pre-packaged with 5 things: vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants. Okay, the simple acronym for that is WAVE-FM, W-A-V-F-M. Water, antioxidants, vitamins, fiber, minerals. Every time you open your mouth and you consume fruits or carbohydrate-rich foods like potatoes or squash or quinoa or beans or lentils, every time you consume those foods, the amount of water, antioxidants, vitamins, fiber, and minerals that's going into your mouth is so large that those behind-the-scenes players are the players that are basically minimizing total body inflammation. They're helping conduct a very complicated orchestra of thousands of reactions in your liver, in your blood vessels, in your heart, in your liver, in your kidney, in your muscles, and in your brain. And without those behind-the-scenes players, you run the risk of developing nutrient deficiencies in the long term. So when you consume refined sugar, you don't get any of that. You literally get fructose and or glucose. That's it. There's no vitamins, there's no fiber, there's no water, there's no minerals, and there's no antioxidants. So the difference is very clear from a nutritional perspective. When those foods go into your mouth, fruit-based carbohydrates do not spike your blood glucose if your fat intake is low. If you consume sugar that's a refined product, then a lot of people end up with variable blood glucose, elevated blood glucose, and an increased need for insulin or oral medication. Okay. So Wesley says, could intermittent fasting combined with a whole food plant-based diet improve your insulin sensitivity even further? Wesley, brilliant question. The answer is yes. In our program, we teach you about intermittent fasting. Why do you want to do it in the first place? How do you actually perform it? And the reason it's part of the program is because intermittent fasting itself is one of the single most powerful strategies that anybody can implement for improved insulin sensitivity and improved vascular health, period. So all you have to do is not eat food for approximately 24-hour period once a week. And as a result of doing that, you will gain insulin sensitivity, reverse insulin resistance, and continue to lose weight. So the answer is yes. It's a very, very powerful tool. And in combination with a whole food, plant-based diet that is low in fat, you can see tremendous improvement in your overall insulin sensitivity. Kevin says, is diabetes affected by gout or vice versa? Kevin, I don't necessarily know if there is a connection between gout and diabetes. I think they're two separate conditions that can exist in your body simultaneously. Gout is caused by a crystallization of uric acid inside of your joints. So uric acid accumulates inside of your joints and then it crystallizes. And then when you move your joints, nerves inside of your joints get really frustrated because it's very painful. There are some very specific foods which you can consume on a regular basis, which will decrease uric acid formation and promote uric acid clearance. And I'll tell you one of them right off the bat is cherries. Cherries have a very specific anti-gout effect. So I don't know if you've ever experimented around with this, but cherries are just one of many foods that can actually minimize joint inflammation. So if you try that, you can see that your overall joint health will increase significantly. Okay, here's some more questions. Let's see, Emily says, do you have a medical professional on your team in case we try the diet out and we have adverse reactions? Emily, on our team, we are in the process of getting medical professionals. We have access to medical professionals. And if you have any specific concerns you want us to address to them, we can do that for sure. There are no medical professionals that are part of this program as yet. That is something that's it's a little bit more involved than anybody really wants it to be. And we're moving in that direction for sure. All right. Let's see here. What are the questions you see out there, Robbie? Anything?
Let's see. When is the best time to test type 2 diabetes sugar at home? Did you answer that one yet?
What's the question?
When's the best time to test your blood glucose?
What type of diabetes?
Type 2. The answer is in the morning.
Yeah. First thing, fasting. If you're living with type 2 and you're curious about how often to check your blood glucose, first things first, check your blood glucose first thing in the morning when you're fasting. That right there is a great indicator of how much glucose your liver has produced overnight. If you want to check your glucose later in the day, we recommend choose any meal and can check your blood glucose 2 hours after you are done eating that meal. By doing so, you can get an idea of what type of glucose excursion happened as a result of that meal. And then that will give you an indicator of how your glucose metabolism is performing and whether or not it needs to be improved. Okay. So Dathan writes here, all sugar is refined. The only difference between sugar and a fruit is the fiber. If you eat an apple, it will have the same effect as drinking a Coke. Your body doesn't differentiate between the two types. The only thing that differentiates is how fast it's metabolized by your body. So Dathan, that is not a true statement. Like we said earlier, the presence of vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, and antioxidant in whole foods is a completely separate nutritional, it's a completely separate combination of nutritional components. And the presence of those micronutrients is what provides significant benefit to all tissues in your body, whether or not it's your small intestine, your large intestine, your liver, your pancreas, your muscles, your brain, your thyroid gland, you name it. So point being, we absolutely cannot compare drinking a Coke to eating an apple. You cannot compare drinking a Coke to eating a banana. They're two separate entities. They shouldn't even be used. They shouldn't even be compared to each other, because even though they both have a sweet flavor, the glucose that you get from a banana does not behave in the same way that the refined glucose you get from a Coke does. So thanks for your comment. Appreciate it.
Somebody's asking, what's the difference between your program, the 8-10-10 diet, and the starch solution diet? Basically, they're all based on the same principles. It's a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. You get to decide which version works best for you based on where you live and the foods you like and your food budget. So they're all very much similar. We recommend and support all of them. Okay, so what else do we have here? Let's see. I think we've done a good job here of pretty much answering the questions that have come in. If there's some buried that we missed, we're sorry about that. But I think we did pretty good here.
All right, so here's what I want you guys to do. In the chat box, I want you guys to write, what did you learn? That's the question. What did you learn from this webinar? Just put it in the chat box and let us know, because after the webinar, we go through and we read every single comment. I want to know, what was interesting to you? What did you learn? And what do you need help with? So start with, what did you learn? All right, Cindy figured out how much protein she needs per day. Great. Awesome, Cindy. How can I start eating russet potatoes tonight? Can I start eating russet potatoes tonight?
If you're just starting and you're insulin resistant, then you got to make sure to eat a significant amount of vegetables with the potatoes.
So it's a two-step process. Number one, decrease your fat intake first. Do not increase your carbohydrate intake without decreasing your fat intake. That is a very, very important thing. So number one, minimize your fat. Number two, start to eat more carbohydrates. If you flip-flop them, you're likely to get high blood glucose. Okay, so we got some results here. Some people saying they're learning things about need to take vitamin B12. That's very good. Emily learned that she's eating herself into a carbohydrate intolerant state. Awesome, Emily. It's one of the most important lessons you'll ever learn about total body health. I learned about my body, but need to listen to the webinar again to fully understand it. No worries. We'll send you out a replay for sure. Clarification on why ketogenic diets does not help insulin resistance. Good, Carolyn, I'm glad you learned that. Cindy said, I'm type 2 and I already figured out that the less fat, the more I can eat. Awesome. Great. Learned that all diets have long and short-term gains, but now I'm learning keto, short-term, good, long-term bad. Awesome. Flaky, if that's how you pronounce your name, I'm glad you learned that. That's a very important thing. Better understanding of how fats and carbs interact with a healthy lifestyle. Good. Lisa, how do I respond to people about where I get my protein? Or how to? Good. Tell them that all plants have protein. You can read some, if you go to Engine 2, is it engine2diet.com or engine2.com?
Just Google Engine 2 diet.
Google Engine 2 diet. You'll find an article about Rick Esselstyn. He has some ways that you can talk to people about your protein intake. It's actually really cool.
So Charlotte's asking, where can you sign up if you choose to in a few days? So if you sign up within the 48-hour window period, you get the All Access Pass for free. If you sign up after that, you can just simply go to masteringdiabetes.org, and at the very top there's a coaching tab, and you can sign up from the coaching tab. The link that we posted in here will always work as well. You could save that link, and you can sign up.
Okay, I do see one thing here. It says, Flaky, she wrote, I learned that fruits are not bad anymore, neither are carbs. Fat is back to being the enemy. I want to highlight one word you used, enemy. This is something in the nutrition world. Marketing always positions certain foods or certain nutrients as being the enemy. Maybe I should have clarified this earlier, and I apologize if I didn't. Fat is not the enemy. We're not trying to avoid fat. We're not trying to completely eliminate fat. All we want you guys to understand is that the amount of fat that you consume significantly influences your level of insulin resistance. It's up to you what you want to do. If you choose to eat a high-fat diet, that is okay. Just know that it's going to make you insulin resistant. If you choose to eat a small amount of fat, then that's okay. You're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. That's the take-home message, right? So I don't want you guys to think, oh, I can never eat anything that contains fat. Fat is bad, 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 bad. That's not true. Fat is just consequential. That's the way to think about it. Fat has consequences. Okay.
Simply what's helped sticking to it. You know, we have an article about this. It's on the Cyrus's Mega Man Nutrition website. The number one mistake that people make on this program is they don't eat enough. They don't eat enough calorie-dense foods. And that's one thing that can help. Obviously, you know, learning techniques on how to deal with challenging situations is important as well. But it usually can be as simple as learning how to eat enough, and you won't crave those horrible sweets at work.
Dathan writes, why in the age of low-fat diets and more plant-based diets do we have higher cases of obesity and diabetes? Dathan, really good question. In the world that we currently live in, plant-based diets and truly low-fat diets are a very, very small minority of the population. You'll see this all over America tried a low-fat diet back in the 1980s and it didn't work. America never tried a low-fat diet. America tried a diet that contained about 38% of calories from fat. That is not low fat. In reality, if you're going to improve your insulin resistance, your fat intake has to become below 15%. There has never been a society, there's never been a large number of people that have truly followed a low-fat diet. So until that happens, we won't be able to truly understand whether or not low-fat diets are dangerous, okay? Point being is that all the evidence that we have shows that eating a more plant-based approach, eating a low-fat diet is beneficial. People are reversing diseases left and right. So for the small proportion of the population that's actually following a low-fat plant-based diet, it works. It works like a charm. But for the vast majority of people that are not following it, that's why diabetes and heart disease is continuing to grow.
Elaine is asking, will I become insulin sensitive even while I'm still overweight? So we just published an article on the website, masteringdiabetes.org, about a peer-reviewed study where people did become insulin sensitive while their weight stayed steady. So go and check out that article and you'll totally understand. Okay, let's see. What else?
Okay, at what interval should we take food? It totally depends. You could eat as few as 2 meals a day. You could eat as many as 6 meals per day. What we recommend is just start with a standard 3 meals a day: breakfast, space, lunch, space, dinner. If you find that that is not enough food and that you're getting hungry in between your meals, then either increase the size of those meals or add one more meal. That's fine. But we have people who are eating 6 times a day. We have people who are eating twice a day. And it's possible on a low-fat, plant-based whole foods approach to make sure that you're meeting your calorie needs and you're reversing insulin resistance at the same time. Okay, what are intact whole grains? Okay, so intact whole grains are basically grains that have not been processed. So here's a perfect example of an intact whole grain. Suppose you go and try and buy oatmeal. Okay, you go to the store and you're saying, I want to eat oatmeal. Okay, there's many different versions of oatmeal. There's oat groats, which you can buy in the bulk section or you can buy it in a package. Then there's steel cut oatmeal. Then there's rolled oatmeal, and then there's instant oatmeal. Okay, I just listed them in order of decreasing intactness. Okay, so the most intact of all of those is oat groats. The second most intact is steel cut. The third most intact is rolled oats. The fourth most intact is instant oatmeal. So think about the level of intactness as being an indicator of how much the grain has been processed. If it's been processed a lot, it loses a lot of nutrients, it loses a lot of fiber, and therefore can spike your blood glucose more than if it stays fully intact. Will I become insulin sensitive even while I'm still overweight? You just answered that, right?
Yes.
Cool.
What in history brought on a rise in diabetes type 2? Honestly, it's a high-fat diet that America eats. It's that simple.
Yep, it's a high-fat and high-fat and high-refined sugar together diet. So it's a terrible. It's called the standard American diet, as Adam Sudd says. Adam Sudd is one of the. We wrote an article about him. A good friend of ours. Reverse type 2 diabetes altogether. The standard American diet is the most. What does he say? The most addictive and deadliest substance on the planet. He's absolutely right. Standard American diet is high fat and high refined sugar together. If you want diabetes, just eat that. If you don't, we highly recommend the plant-based approach.
Can I eat frozen fruits and veggies in the winter, or does that have... No, you can definitely eat frozen and fruits and veggies, 100%. Enjoy them. So let's see here. Somebody's talking about their macros. So honestly, we're not like, the general guideline is you can eat, there's an 80-10-10 guideline, which is the general, a minimum of 80% of calories from carbohydrates, minimum, and no more than 10% maximum from fats and protein. So a minimum of 80% of carbohydrates, meaning you can go above, and a maximum of 10% from fat and protein. We adjust that. You can go more about a 70-15 ratio. But again, we don't want you to get stuck up on that. Really, if you just eat whole foods, if you pick the right whole foods, the ratio sorts itself out. This is not, a calorie counting, difficult thing. You just figure out to eat the right foods, how to minimize your fat intake, and you just don't have to worry about it. That's the whole goal here. Okay, is there a genetic component to type 2? Yeah, I guess there is a small genetic component, but the main thing is lifestyle. No doubt. Lifestyle can trump the genetics.
100%.
Let's see. Somebody's asking, my fasting blood sugar has gone up on this diet, but it's okay if I exercise the day before. Why? Again, we would need to see a lot more detailed information here. Exactly what you're eating, exactly what you're doing, how high is that fasting blood glucose, what happens during the day. There's a lot more factors to be able to help there. How do you preserve your fruits when buying in bulk? Different fruits ripen at different stages, and every fruit's a little different. Mangoes, you can buy some that are already soft and some that are hard. And then you eat the soft ones first, and then once those are done, the hard ones have become soft. You can put things in the fridge. It's really a fruit by fruit situation there.
Fruit by fruit.
Yeah.
I love it.
A low amount of fat have a negative effect on neurological problems like epilepsy.
Yeah. What was the question?
Will the low amount of fat have a negative effect on neurological problems like epilepsy?
Great, Katie, this is a phenomenal question, because what we've basically established is that a ketogenic approach was the #1 most effective approach for reducing seizure incidence, and that is a true statement. So does that mean that the opposite is true, which is that if you increase your carbohydrate intake, that you will have more seizures? I do not know the answer to that question. That is a very interesting question, and I'm going to read up a little bit more about that and hopefully get back to you. But I'm going to refrain from commenting on that, because the answer could be yes, but the answer may also not be yes, depending on the type of carbohydrate that's being consumed. It could be a refined carbohydrate problem. It could be the fact that refined carbohydrates and sugars increase seizure incidence. That's what my gut tells me. But again, let me read about that and get back to you.
Somebody is asking us, how do you decide which questions to answer on Facebook? The answer is, if it's a new, fresh, original post, we answer every single question. If it's in the comments, it's hard for us to have every single comment. But if you write a fresh new post, you have a question for us, somebody's going to answer that within 24 hours. Somebody's saying we do a webinar about your program. Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe we do an entire webinar just in more detail about the program. That's something to consider. But we certainly covered a lot of the basics of the program here tonight. You can come and check it out. It's $29 a month. It's a pretty low risk to come in and see how it's going to work for you. Let's see. Do you have to go organic in your program? So organic is an option. It's not required. It's not necessary. Everybody's situation is going to be different on what they have access to, finances. The most important thing is that it's low-fat, plant-based, whole food, 100%. Let's see. All right. Can I eat yams on this plan? Absolutely. Whole yams are terrific. Somebody's asking, how does this diet help hypothyroidism?
It's a great call. Okay, so hypothyroidism can be mildly improved through a low-fat, plant-based, whole foods diet. I will not tell you that you can completely reverse hypothyroidism, because I do not believe that that's a true statement. I've looked for research about that and I can't seem to find it. But what I do know is that hypothyroidism can lead to a number of complicated issues. Number one, you can lose a lot of energy. Number two, it can slow down when you're not producing a sufficient amount of thyroid hormone. It slows down metabolic processes, and as a result of that, you're more likely to gain weight. So a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet addresses both of those, and you can easily lose weight. I mean, that happens without even blinking. That's number one. And number two, you gain a ton of energy because, like you showed you earlier, you end up storing a lot of glucose inside of your muscles, inside your liver. And your brain becomes quite happy because now glucose is available for use at all times. So by gaining energy and by gaining energy and losing weight, effectively what you're doing is you're reversing the symptomology of hypothyroidism. And in some situations, people have found that their thyroid hormone levels do go up a little bit, and some people have found that it does not. Personally, I have found that my thyroid hormone levels go up a little bit, but they plateau. So it's a very important set of reactions, and you can definitely see improvement in your overall feelings of sluggishness and inability to lose weight.
Somebody's asking a question about nuts and seeds. So those are in the yellow light category. So they can be a part of the program. They can be a great addition to a dressing. They can be included, but in moderate amounts. That's the key. And everybody needs to be careful. Some people, they can't just eat nuts in moderation. So it's better to take them out of the house and just not eat them, because it just sort of provokes eating way too much. But every person can figure it out on their own. It's certainly a yellow light food, which can be included on the program. Will this diet decrease foggy minds? We've certainly heard the benefits for mental health.
No question. I've actually worked with individuals on a one-on-one basis before creating this program. And some of those individuals suffer from what they call foggy head, foggy brain, or an inability to sort of think properly and make cognitive decisions. Simply by allowing your brain access to more glucose, that is a very powerful way to make sure that you do not have continued cognitive decline. Because again, glucose is your brain's preferred fuel for energy. And when glucose is abundant and it's available 24 hours a day, your brain actually can operate at much higher levels. And as a result of that, you might notice a reduction in your sort of like foggy headedness, inability to think, and or general sort of sluggishness.
All right, so Raphael signed up. It's awesome to have you in, and you don't have access to the All Access Pass yet. So we have to manually give you access to that, which will be done in the next 24 hours for sure. So you'll get that taken care of. Let's see, what else do we have here? A nice funny joke from the person in London. It's late in London. Yeah, get some sleep, watch the replay. Let's see, you have to limit fruit and veggie fat like avocado. Yes. So fat from avocados, durian, coconut meat, whole olives, foods like that. You cannot eat unlimited quantities of those foods. That's going to lead to insulin resistance. No question about it. Cyrus and I, in our own personal experience, we can see that objectively right away. And in hundreds of clients, we see the same thing. So you got to be careful, even with the delicious, tasty plant fats. I mean, don't we all wish we could just eat unlimited avocados? So how do we get the replay? So everybody will get emailed a link to watch the replay if they want to watch it again. And again, it's a 48-hour window to get the bonus of the $97 All Access Pass. Okay, I don't really see new questions coming in, so I think we're good here. this has been really great, guys. Really appreciate all of you who've been stuck around and wanted to hear this information. We love sharing this stuff. It's really our passion. So we hope to see many of you joining the program. We'll see you on our monthly video calls, and we will be supporting you in the Facebook group every single day and sharing new videos with you guys every week. So new pieces of content, whether it's recipes or expert interviews or important pieces of information, where the course is always growing. So thanks again, guys, and we will see you on the inside.
Yep. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Super fun.